My name is Robert Levenson, and I'm on the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley. Interpersonal Synchrony. When we first started studying emotion in the laboratory, we thought it would probably be best to study it in interactions because most emotions occur in social situations. And so we started bringing couples into the laboratory. This is some work I did with John Gottman. I think it was like around 1980. And we actually observed a lot of couples in the lab, watched videotapes afterwards. And one of the things that sort of struck us was that they tended to get into these bouts of sort of being locked into each other. And they usually were around fairly unpleasant topics. They locked horns and they couldn't get unlocked. And we thought, these seem like really significant moments, and we need a way of sort of capturing and quantifying them. So, because I was very interested in psychophysiology, and John was very interested in behavior, we thought we could characterize these. They probably would have some sort of a signature in physiology and behavior. And that's how we started studying them. Well, we haven't changed the way we study it very much, and I think in some ways this is what most people do. We use unstructured conversations in the sense that we don't rehearse or we tell them what to say, but they have a topic. And we either have people talk about the events of their day when they haven't been together for a while, or they talk about an area of disagreement, or they talk about something that they enjoy doing together. So those are the three topics that we tend to use, and we've used them for pretty much the duration of the time we've been studying interpersonal synchrony.
And what kind of things do you measure during or before and after?
Well, we're interested in sort of the way that emotions become linked. And so to understand anything about emotion, you need to study emotional experience and emotional behavior and emotional physiology. And so we study linkage in all three. We measure the physiology during the interactions. This was the original sort of draw for us as to why we got interested in it. And we have ways of characterizing the extent to which they become synchronized or linked. For behavior, we used some behavioral coding systems from videotape where we are able to identify the emergence of particular emotions in the face and you know, in the kind of the body, and we're able to sort of look for those moments where they both are sort of mirroring each other emotionally. And then we had this sort of innovation that we introduced for self-reported emotional experience, where instead of just asking people at the end of a conversation or interrupting them during, we had them watch a video of their own interaction, and they had like a joystick device where they could indicate what they were feeling moment to moment. And that becomes like another physiological indicator, and you can look at the moments where they're kind of going together and the moments where they're relatively independent. Yeah, well, I think the original findings were that these moments of negative affect, where people become behaviorally and experientially and physiologically linked, were kind of bad signs. They weren't good. They were associated with things like couples who were not very happy with their relationships in the moment, and they were predictive of couples who would become less happy with their relationships over time, and they were linked to sort of poor health and whatnot. And then when we came back to this, maybe 20 years later, and I had a new cohort of graduate students who were interested in positive emotion. We went back and we started looking at linkage during these more positive emotions where people are sharing laughter and joy and affection and whatnot. We found that these were also powerfully related, but more in the other direction, obviously, to happier marriages, and remarkably predictive of changes in health and even longevity over decades. So the extent to which these moments of shared positivity occurred in these interactions in our laboratory told us a whole lot about the course of the marriage and enable us to make pretty good predictions about how long people would live and how healthy they would be.
After you've seen so many couples over the years, happy and less happy, is there any advice you give to couples on how to end up in the happier category?
Yeah. Well, my friend John Gottman and I kind of diverged on this, and he saw all this unhappiness, and he said, I can fix it. I can train people how to teach them how to have better relationships. And I looked at it and I thought, this is kind of stuck. It's never going to change. I think people just need to make better choices as to the people that they get into relationships with. So somewhere between that thing of, finding a person who you can really spend your life with, which is very different than a person you're in love with in the moment when you're 20 or something like that. And then, if you get into trouble and there is some basis for something to be fixed there, seeing somebody who's a really skilled counselor, maybe you can sort of get people back on track, especially those couples who sort of were doing well, and then maybe they ran across some of the challenges of life, like building a family or having financial setbacks, and like if someone makes a compromise for the other person's career. These are the kinds of things that knock people off their course and things that are really hard to come back from. And I think those are the kinds of things that probably, with a really skilled counselor and a little bit of luck, you can actually get back on track. But I think one of the ironies in my personal life is that the people who I'm friends with, almost to a person, had these really long, successful marriages. And some of the people who I was involved with early in my life went on to have really good marriages. So I think of myself as kind of, the hat in Harry Potter. I'm kind of the hat that sort of puts people on this path to good marriages, or maybe picks the people who are going to have them. And then myself, I didn't marry until really late in life. So, I kind of had a lot of experience watching other people fail. So I hope I'll do well.
You're a blessing for
Maybe.
relationships.
I like to think of myself as a hat, but I'll take I'm a blessing. Yeah.